initially, I enrolled at ECU in a pre-engineering program. Found out very quickly that I did not have the academic background for that. But part of that program included drafting, and drafting was taught by the Industrial Arts Department. And so I actually wound up being in the department and got fascinated with the labs, the shops, the woodworking, the metalworking. And so when I figured out that I wasn't going to follow engineering, I wanted to be an industrial arts teacher. And that put me on the path in education. I did graduate in 3 years. The day I graduated from college, the next day I started work at New Bern High School in Craven County, teaching industrial arts. And I did that for about 2.5 years, but did realize that perhaps I didn't want to do that the rest of my life. So I had already started a master's degree and figured I was going to be a principal, public school principal. And was finishing that up when I was taking a course with a man called Thurman Brock, who actually became the first president. He and I commuted back and forth together, and he was telling me about his work in trying to get this thing started, doing the initial application, which, by the way, was really involved. And I listened to him, and it was interesting, but I didn't see it as a career for me. And when he got it started, he asked me would I like to do some part-time work with him, and I did. And my first work with the college was with the ABE program, Adult Basic Education, teaching adults to read and write. And I became thoroughly fascinated with that, but I was working at night. And I did that for a couple of months, and then he notified me that he wanted me to come full time. So I did do that and joined him in April of '66, and had been was with the college ever since then. I started out as the Dean of Continuing Education, which, by the way, I've always said was a job tailor-made for Steve Red. I did and love it. I enjoyed it. I worked with firemen, with policemen. I often said I could get up one morning and decide what kind of new course I wanted to start, because I had virtual freedom to do anything, any course that I could find 10 people that wanted to take that. I did a lot of work with the base here at Cherry Point. We did their apprentice program at one time. I did a lot of crafts. When I say I did them, I set them up. Did crafts, piano, music classes, just a whole variety of things. And I could work in the morning in Havelock and work in New Bern, and then wound up in the western part of Craven County working with farmers to give them some extra educational opportunities. It was just a wonderful, wonderful job. I did that for the first 15 years. I actually put together 2 rescue vehicles and kept one of them at my house for about 3 years. And these rescue vehicles that I built could carry compressed air and had halogen lights. So every once in a while, fire control would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and tell me that one of the fire chiefs had requested the college van. So I would get out and run it to wherever it was. Eventually, the city built a new fire station, and they agreed to house it. So I got relieved of that duty. But it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that. In 1980, Dr. Brock wanted me to assume the position of what basically was the academic dean of the college. And so I did that. That meant that I was in charge of all the academic programs, continuing ed, curriculum, all the instructional programs. I did that for the next 10 years, and then in 1989, Dr. Brock retired, and the trustees eventually, after about 6 months, I was acting president for the first 6 months, and then they, fortunately for me, granted me the opportunity to be the president, and so I did that for the next 13 years. During that time was when I was working on this Havelock campus, and unfortunately my wife had a severe stroke and was wound up paralyzed, so I had to go ahead and retire about 3 years earlier than I had anticipated, but I needed to do that to take care of her. So that was in 2002. So anyway, I have enjoyed retirement, and my wife survived for another 17 years, but she passed away in 2016. But in any event, my career at the college was just a godsend. I did tell, when I became president, I said something to a reporter, and I learned real quickly that when you talk to a reporter, whatever you say can wind up being the headlines the next day. When we were discussing, kind of like you and I are discussing today, I told him that I kind of backed into my career. And what I meant by that was that I thought I was going to be in public education, thought I was going to be a school principal, and took a part-time job, and it changed my life entirely. But I told him I backed into my career, my community college career, and the next day when I opened up the paper, the headline says, "New college president says he backed into his career." But anyway, it has been a wonderful opportunity for me. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I had a whole lot of freedom. I didn't stay in the office very much. I was mostly in the community, recruiting people that had special skills to teach things. I also had to find a place for every class I had. I had very little opportunity to use the campus because the curriculum programs used it. I used the public schools, I used community centers, I used fire stations, anywhere, rec centers, anywhere I could beg, borrow, or steal a location for the classes. But it was a fun job. And I don't mean to say that the rest of it wasn't fun, but it was more adventurous than the other kinds of the jobs that I had, either as the dean of the college or as the president. But I enjoyed all of it. I would, as I said, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. When we first got started, it's hard to relate the fact to people today when they look at all that the college is, all the community college system is, both statewide and national. It's hard to relate that it wasn't at one time very accepted by the public as a viable part of the educational hierarchy. When we started, my first year, we were in the top floor of the St. Luke Hospital building in downtown New Bern, 2 rooms. Dr. Brock and I and the secretary shared one room for an office, and we had a classroom which housed our entire student population of 12 students the first year. We soon moved to the Harvey Mansion and also to the school at Croatan, Leona Tolson School. It was an abandoned black elementary school that held the machine shop and the drafting and the welding program, and then everything else, such as it was at what is now the Harvey Mansion. The Harvey Mansion was built in 1790, and it looked it. I mean, it was awfully. The rooms were heated with open flame gas heaters. When I had a new teacher, I had to give her a box of chalk and a box of safety matches and teach her how to light the gas, because we couldn't leave the heat on all the time. The lounge was a one-room in the basement, and believe it or not, half the floor was dirt. You know, we did things that would be absolutely absurd today, wouldn't meet any code whatsoever. The entire lounge consisted of one drink machine and one nab machine, and guess who had to fill them up? Every day I had to restock them, and then count the money and prepare a deposit on that. But I also wound up, believe it or not, cutting the grass. We didn't have a maintenance staff. We didn't have a janitor. And in fact, we didn't even have a lawnmower. I had to go buy a lawnmower myself to cut the little bit of grass that we had. But it was an austere start when we moved to the new campus. Well, by the way, we were there for 7 years, a little bit longer than we thought we were going to be. When we moved to the new campus, it was like the world had opened up. I mean, it was just, everything was new, and it was built for purpose. It was clean. We thought we were in heaven. Absolutely thought we were in heaven. Another thing about that, we actually outgrew the Harvey Mansion very quickly. We had no parking, so students had to find a place to park downtown New Bern. And when we moved from there to the new campus, we brought the same students with us, and all of a sudden we had more room. I kind of thought, I was mighty young then, I thought, Lordy, we'll have a hard time filling this all up. As it turned out, once we had the new campus put forth a better image, and we quadrupled the enrollment in 4 years. And believe it or not, very quickly ran out of space on that campus too. But that's a little bit about how small everything was. When we were at the old campus, I can't remember exactly how many staff members we had when we moved, but it was just a handful. And of course, as we grew, the staff also grew quite a bit in the new campus. It's amazing though, when we first started, there were very few community colleges in the state. They were coming online about one every month somewhere, and you know, they wound up to be 57 eventually. But it was a difficult time to bring on a new entity. Integration was going on. There was a lot of civil unrest. There was a lot of mistrust of particularly new government programs. I think a lot of people looked at us and thought, well, it's a here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing. It was very difficult to establish an image of viability with the community, and it took a long time. It took probably nearly 2 decades to really do that. I'll give you an example. I had a friend one time that called me and said that his son was getting ready to go to college, and the son had some maturity problems. And he rattled off 3 universities in this state, and what he wanted to know was which one I would recommend, like I knew much about all the other universities. And I told him, I said, well, you know, as far as I know, they're all 3 very fine institutions. I said, but since you mentioned the maturity problem, have you considered sending him to the college for the first 2 years? And he looked at me like I was crazy. Like, had I lost my mind that I would suggest his son go to a community college. As it turns out, a year later, he called me back in the middle of the year and wanted to know if I could use my position to get his son into community college because he had flunked out of the university system. And I told him that we were open enrollment and that his son could certainly come the very next. We were on the quarter basis then, and he could come the very next quarter. But that's kind of the attitude that existed at the time, and it took a very long time. I'll tell you what did it probably more than anything else was the advent of technology. All of a sudden, so many of the careers, the jobs were suddenly requiring a level of sophistication that it had never seen before, and most of it had to do with computerization, auto mechanics, machine shop. Things were going digital very fast, and that was not something that the universities were equipped to handle, but the community colleges were. And all of a sudden, people began to look at us, politicians, community leaders, industrial leaders, began to look at us as a viable solution to the problems they were having in recruiting people with at least basic digital skills. And that changed the lay of the land quite a bit, and it just has gone up since then. But it was a difficult time to go through. I want to tell you that the college became like a child to me. It was a job, there's no doubt about that, but it was a lot more to me than a job. It was a creation that I believed in with all my heart and soul, and did not take kindly to people that were in a position to criticize it. I had an industrialist one time tell me, a major industrialist, he said, "Steve," he said, "your problem is that you won't listen." Said, "When people like my fellow industrialists are being somewhat critical, you don't listen to them, you defend it." I said, "Well, yes, I do. I do defend it." I did learn later on to be more receptive to, let's say, constructive criticism, but it was hard to take because we got so much of it in the early days. We just weren't looked at as a viable alternative to universities, as on par with the universities or even the public schools for that matter in the early days. But fortunately things changed, and of course not only the college but the system is well regarded today, and I'm so proud of that. So I think I maybe played a role in that, but it was a learning experience for Steve too. So it's just amazing when you play at least a partial role in somebody usually middle-aged or younger, but not a kid, comes to the college looking to improve their life and perhaps might do it through education, and they do that and then wind up in the community. Newbern is not a tremendously large community, and quite often when I'm in the community at this age, I do a lot of doctor visits. I always ask the nurses where they got their training, and so many times they got their training with Craven, and that just gives me a real sense of not only pride but also appreciation. It's verification of what I believe in, and it's just so rewarding to see people who have been able to with the college, with the help of the college, to improve at least their career aspirations and then go on from there. And that's true with the students who are in the college transfer program too. I think the college transfer program has probably allowed hundreds of students to pursue a 4-year degree, whereas without the first 2 years, they might not have been able to do that and probably wouldn't have been able to do that. One of the programs I started was a consortium with ECU's Department of Education. We had been doing a lot of transfer work with ECU, but there were a lot of, and I'm going to say primary females who wanted a career in elementary education, but they were in their 30s, they had children, they could not go 4 years to ECU. And so I talked the chancellor at ECU into establishing an on-site whereby the college would have the students for 2 years, and then the students would still be on Craven campus, but ECU would send the professors over to teach. And that really worked out. That program, I think, is still in existence. But I would be willing to bet you that there are probably 300 teachers out there today that would not have been able to do that had it not been for the opportunity that the community college offered. Back in the 80s, I talked the commissioners into financing some rental facilities here it was actually in a shopping center here in Havelock. And my thinking was that if I could, using rental facilities, create an obvious, or prove a need, create classes and prove a need, that then I'd be in a position to sell them on financing buildings and a campus. Well, I was successful in getting the rental facilities. In fact, we put a cosmetology school in down here and quite a number of computer labs and some of the general classrooms. But I was having difficulty selling them on the idea of financing buildings and a campus. When I became president, the first thing I did was that I went to every leading industry and sat down with the CEO and asked them what they wanted out of their community college, what they were looking for. And all of them greeted me with open arms and were very frank about what they were what they needed. One of the last people I came to was the CEO, or the CO, the commanding officer of what was then NADAP. He told me in no uncertain terms that he was not only surprised but disappointed that the college hadn't done anything to support the largest industry east of Raleigh, which was at that time NADAP, 5,000 employees. And I thought, well, you know, he's absolutely right. And I said, well, what do you think we need to do? He said, our biggest need is lack of a source of new employees coming into our environment having some basic aviation maintenance skills. He said, ideally, FAA, A&P licensed. Well, as soon as he said that, I thought, well, you know, what he's talking about is big time money to put that kind of program in, plus a facility. But when I went away, I thought, I almost believe that we could combine these two and have a selling product. And that's what I did. I came up with this concept of an aviation maintenance school along with the classroom facilities. The library was not part of my original thing. That came through the county. That was not my idea, but I was glad to go along with it. When I first created this thought in my mind, I went to some of the community leaders, and particularly those leaders down here in Havelock, the mayors and things. And when I would sit down with them and tell them what I was thinking, they basically would say, well, that is great. That's just wonderful. But I could see it in their eyes. They were saying, it's never going to happen. But I'm not going to tell him that. Well, with the help of a lot of other people, at the time, Senator Beverly Perdue, the base commander here, General Broughton, we got the ball rolling. And I produced a document. I wish I'd have brought it. It's a booklet. I'll keep one copy of it. Because I was trying to sell it to the public too at the same time, because what I was asking with the commissioners was for them to appropriate several $1 million, and they needed to know that was a viable public proposal. So anyway, with the aviation school, my idea was to partner with NADAP, and hopefully the students could go to school part of the day and go on an apprentice type work, part-time work, the rest of the day. If I was going to do that, it had to be close. The base actually offered to provide some land for us, but I ran into a problem because you can't use state money to build a building on somebody else's property. So the next best solution was to locate it as close as possible. I already knew there was an abandoned housing area that was put up in 1942 when the base was started and had been torn down. So I made a proposal to get the Marine Corps to give the college that land. Found out that the Marine Corps doesn't take kindly to giving away their land. But I had the general on my side, and he helped me. And over a period of 3 to 4 years, we went through the entire hierarchy of the Marine Corps all the way up to the commandant. And then guess what? We had to start over again because the Marine Corps, while they have control of the land, they don't own it. It's owned by the Navy, which owns the Marine Corps. So I had to start over again with the Navy. Went all the way up through the Secretary of Navy. All of this takes months and months. And then, once the Secretary of the Navy approved it, it had to go to Congress, the House and the Senate. So we had to fight to get that included into an appropriations bill. And finally, when that happened, it had to have the president's signature. So this is one of those things that takes an act of Congress, as it turned out. At the same time, we were petitioning the state of North Carolina for, and I can't remember the exact amount of money, but I believe it was about $8 million for the aviation facility, building and equipment. Senator Perdue championed that effort. Without her, I don't think it would have happened. But it all came together about the same time, and we were able to get 25 acres of land, very valuable land, free, and then start construction on the buildings. In the meantime, the county did decide they needed a public library, and wanted to know if it could be joined with this project, and I thought it certainly could. There are a couple of other community colleges in the state that have public libraries on their campus. So as far as I know, it has worked out very well for everybody concerned. But anyway, that's kind of how it came about. All total, it took 7 years. I was going to retire after it was completed, but situations dictated that I wasn't able to do that. But the next president, bless his heart, let me come down and cut the ribbon about a year later after I retired. So that's how the Havelock project actually came about. It's kind of comforting to walk over there and see my name on the building, but in any event, I'm very, very proud of this and that, and the campus too. I actually wound up building 5 of the buildings on the campus at the same time I built these 3. I learned this in continuing ed, because where to have a class was a big problem for me, because I had no facilities that I had access to. When we got very crowded on the campus, if you could have the most skilled instructor or teacher, professor, all the students that want to take the class, if you can't seat them somewhere in a classroom or a lab or a shop, you can't have the class. So the physical facilities is a very important part of whether you can bring about this educational opportunity. It's amazing. I did wind up, before we could build the buildings, I actually wound up leasing some mobile classrooms, and I put them on the campus. They served a very good purpose, but they were ugly, and I didn't like them, and I thought sure I was going to get rid of them in 2 years. It actually took me about 5 years to get rid of them before I could get the facilities to house all those things. The other thing about facilities, as the college continues to grow, there's a need to renovate some of the facilities that are already there. So what you build today may look different 10 years down the road because of expansion and things of that nature. When I walk through the facilities, just like I did today, it's amazing to see how things actually have changed for the better because of growth and because of need. So facilities plays a very important part. I think that's a major role for the president to take, because it's basically impossible for anybody else in the organization to take a lead in that aspect of a college, physical plant facilities. It's an area that I did enjoy. It was a wonderful challenge. I enjoyed working with all the commissioners. A lot of the job of president is establishing positive personal relationships with people that have influence that can affect the progress of your organization. And I very much enjoyed that, very much enjoyed that. I did do a bond referendum. It didn't pass. I thought sure, and this is part of my total commitment to the college, and I was so committed I didn't see why anybody else wouldn't be committed to it. And so I talked the commissioners into doing a bond referendum in the early 90s, and it did not pass. Several of the community leaders told me that it was a time when the economy went down, and they said, you need to stop this, you need to stop this, it's not going to pass. And I thought, shoot, it's going to pass, because people are going to know what this does for them. Well, I reckon it's kind of like the old saying with politicians, it's the economy, stupid, and And I didn't listen, and I lost that election. A very prominent, I won't call his name, but a very prominent fella called me a couple of days after that, and he said, "Steve, I want to have lunch with you." And he said, he said, "I know you're disappointed." He said, "But there are other ways to do what you want to do." He said, "You just need to find them." And the initial thought in my mind was, how the heck am I going to do that? But I thought about that, and eventually I thought, he was right. He was right in telling me that, and that's what I'm going to do. So that's actually, the Havelock campus was a major part of that bond referendum. It wasn't all of it, but it's part of it. So I thought, I'm just going to have to look at it another way. And that took a lot longer, 7 years. So. And I did not have any major catastrophes to deal with. I thought, goodness gracious, I don't know what I would have done with COVID. My heart went out to everybody that were having to deal with that. I did not have a devastating hurricane. We had some hurricanes, but nothing like Florence. So I was very fortunate in that. Once in a while, one of the things that I hated about my job was that I had to make a decision to close school when a hurricane was coming. And I established a very close relationship with the meteorologist at Channel 12. And he kept me very well informed, but they never could just say, yes, it's going to happen. Yes, it's going to come here at a certain time. And you're thinking, well, do I close school and create all that havoc? But if I keep it open, am I endangering lives? And I remember one time a hurricane came up the coast, and when it got it was in the ocean, when it got between us and Wilmington, it stalled. And I closed school. And the very next day, the hurricane turned and went out to sea, and we had a beautiful day and no college. And boy, did I catch a lot of flack for that. But you have to weigh that, and it's a difficult decision because all that class time has to be made up when you cancel school like that. So, but I did not have any major catastrophes during my entire career. So, very fortunate. I didn't have to deal with what my like the current president has had to deal with, and the one before him. So actually, there have been 3 since I was in. So. One of the things that I readily realized and didn't fault is that the last day that you were president, the next day you have no responsibilities whatsoever, none whatsoever. And that can be a good relief. Be honest with you, but I do enjoy. I visit the campus quite a bit. I do relish the campus looking very nice. I did a lot of things to improve the campus appearance. My successors have certainly done a good job at that. It's a beautiful campus, both that campus and this one. I think it has a lot to do with going back to my old days of fighting the image. When we were in the old Harvey Mansion, I really couldn't fault anybody for looking at this educational entity as being, I want to say less than ideal, even worse than that. Being second rate, third rate, it was shabby, the facilities were, and you couldn't help but assume that if the buildings and the grounds and everything was shabby, that the education must be shabby too. You couldn't help but make that connection. Same thing with going to the new campus. You couldn't help but look at that first building and a half. You couldn't help but look at that and associate that with maybe quality education, because it all looked like it was appropriate to the task at hand. But I do take a lot of pride in, I'm just so thankful that I had the opportunity to build a career there. I did think of the college as my child. In fact, I've often thought, it was kind of like having an infant to start with. An infant needs total care and looking after, and that's what the college did. And then it grew into adolescence and had growing pains, and then it kind of grew into adulthood and became able to stand on its own. And I just would just thankful I had that opportunity, and it was just a very enjoyable career. I wouldn't trade for anything in the world.